and welcome to Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Thanks for joining us. I'm New York State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli. As State Comptroller, it's my job to oversee New York's fiscal health. New York City's residents and businesses help to shape our state's economy, so keeping a close eye on what's happening here in the city is a priority. With my guests today, we'll be discussing education, transportation, efforts to end gun violence, and many other important issues. My first guest is Assemblymember Deborah Glick. Deborah Glick has represented Greenwich Village and Tribeca, downtown Manhattan, in the state legislature for 27 years and is well known as a staunch defender of New Yorkers' rights. Assemblymember Deborah Glick, my good friend, it is a pleasure to see you. Thanks for joining us. I have to say that you were one of my favorite colleagues when I served with you in the State Assembly. And you know, whenever I would look at an issue or a bill, one of the ways to measure whether or not I was doing the right thing was to see what Deborah Glick was saying and how she was voting. So I really thank you for truly being a champion for all these years, not just for your own district here in Manhattan, but you really are one of the great leaders on so many key issues across the state, and you persevere. Not easy to keep going, and you have, and we appreciate that. Just ended session. A lot of press reports about session having a lot of disappointment for many legislators. What disappointments did you have as we ended session in 2018?
Well, first, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I think you're one of the finest public servants we've ever had. So it's a pleasure to be here with you. We did get some press, and there is still time for the Senate to remedy their failure to reauthorize the city's speed cameras in school zones. It's a life-saving program. It is too modest, in my opinion, to begin with only 140 cameras. We have many, many, many more school buildings than that. But the bill would add only 50 more a year, and still we could not get that passed. But July 25th is a drop-dead date, so people who are concerned about safety for school children, which you would think would be in the interest of all legislators, should be calling John Flanagan, the majority leader, and say, you know, the bill is live in your house, come back, pass it.
Do you think it was just a function of their own paralysis because they had the 31-31 vote? Was it a political statement against New York City?
Well, I think some of it is an animus towards the mayor, for sure. But I also think that, again, Senator Simcafelder, who is from Brooklyn, wanted a particular initiative. He wants armed police in every school, and that's not an efficient use of our resources. But he was, you know, standing in a corner holding his breath, and the Senate Republicans can't do things without him, and so it didn't happen yet. I'm an optimist, or I wouldn't keep doing this, and so perhaps cooler heads will prevail, and there will be a desire to save children's lives.
I know also on a more local level, and there's a big issue we want to talk about, but the loft law is an issue that you've spent a lot of time on. I remember that from my years of being there. What's an update on that?
Well, there was a period of time during which people could apply to have their lofts legalized. That window closed. People who were in an older cohort are safe. I don't want to upset people and think that their housing is at risk, but there is a new group of artists and artisans who are living in lofts. These are work-live spaces. Many of the things they're doing are not conducive to normal residential housing. And so we had hoped that we could open that window, allow for the legalization so that people have the proper health and safety items that are part of a certificate of occupancy, that window would be reopened, and that some of the reasons people are denied could be remedied. So, you know, New York is a cultural center. We want it to remain that, and it's important to our economy. These are the people, we don't want to chase them to other, across the river to Jersey. Every business, every corporation threatens to leave, and we'll give them millions of dollars to stay here. All these people want is certainty about the roof over their head.
One of the big issues that everybody's concerned about now is brought into sharp focus with the announced retirement of Justice Kennedy from the Supreme Court. And that's certainly the issue of choice. And there has been no stronger champion for women's reproductive health and rights than you, Deborah Glick. Give us an update. You've been fighting on this issue to make sure that New York, while New York is viewed as a pro-state in terms of this important issue, it doesn't mean that our laws are up to speed with the reality of 2018, and certainly with what could be looming from the Supreme Court. Give our viewers an update on where you see that issue headed, what else we need to do here in New York.
Sadly, for 6 years, we have passed it in the Reproductive Health Act in the State Assembly, and it has not moved in the Senate. Many of the senators have said, well, there's no problem in New York, nothing's at risk. Well, now everything is at risk. The bill is very simple. It would move any reference to abortion out of the criminal code into the health code where it belongs. It is a medical procedure. It would update, because New York was ahead of the curve, we predated Roe v. Wade.
A lot of people don't realize that.
They don't realize that. And so we have, we only protect a woman's life, not her health, if something goes wrong later in the pregnancy. So we've relied on federal and constitutional protection. If that goes out the window, the health of New York's women is at risk. And additionally, in 1970, there were certain providers that, health providers that didn't exist, nurse practitioners, midwives. They could utilize medical, not surgical, but medical procedures to assist women. And we want to make certain that women do not have to carry a non-viable fetus to term to satisfy some theory as opposed to her own life, her own health. That's why it's critical. Yeah,
and a lot of the pundits have been projecting that a likely outcome would be that Roe v. Wade would be overturned and it would be delegated back to the states to make decisions. So right away, state law would become very, very key. And if we've got antiquated wording on the books already, either way we're going to have a battle. So let's clarify it right now.
Well, there are about 20 states right now that have laws on the books that say if Roe v. Wade is overturned, abortion will be immediately banned almost in every instance. And some states, regardless of rape, incest, or they may not even allow for the life of the mother. So very extreme positions. The liberal point of view is, people don't have to have abortions. People who want one at an appropriate time or because of a serious circumstance should have that ability. There are other people who want to enforce very strict religious-based interpretations. New York State, we would not be in that situation, but we would lose the protection for the health of a mother. And people don't know that right now in New York State, you have to travel pretty far outside of New York City. You have to travel pretty far before you can find a place where you can get an abortion. So it still is a serious situation in New York State, but it could get dramatically more dangerous.
Another reminder why those running for the state legislature, very important positions. Very often people talk about these big issues in a national context. What is my senator doing? What is my member of Congress doing? Not realizing that members of the state legislature have a lot to do with this as well.
And the state senate is essentially anti-choice. We cannot even get a contraceptive care bill passed in the Senate.
Yeah. Let's switch gears for a bit. Now, you've been recognized as a leader on many issues, and you've been given leadership responsibilities. Big issue for everyone is higher education, access to it, quality of higher education, affordability of it. And you've been chairing the Higher Ed Committee for a number of years now. It's 2007, I think,
yes.
It goes back that far.
Yes.
You've seen the quality, I think, if I could offer my own opinion, been enhanced in New York State, but the pressures in terms of access and affordability, that pressure is as strong today, if not stronger, than when you took over the chairmanship. So give us an update of your perspective of where are we at in terms of providing access to quality higher education for all of New York's residents.
We have two very strong systems, the CUNY system and the SUNY system. In every community upstate where there's a SUNY college or university, there is more economic vibrancy. Mm-hmm. And so I have always suggested that if we're going to look at economic development, some of those dollars should go to our higher education systems, because in fact, those are not, we're not taking a chance that they may take the money, not deliver jobs, and leave town. Mm. Our universities are staying here. And we have a vibrant private university system as well. But I'm a CUNY grad. It is
Queens College?
Queens College. It is the single best predictor of moving people out of poverty into the working and middle class. And it is also clearly important to have an educated electorate. I think that recently 65% of Republicans now believe that higher education is dangerous to the country. So that's a very serious situation. So we have across, it's not just SUNY and CUNY, it's across education across the country. We have moved away from full-time faculty to adjuncts. Mm. We don't pay adjuncts adequately. There's a big push to increase adjunct pay so that it's not a starvation wage. But it's also important for students to have full-time professors so that they can have office hours, so that they can have time on the campus to meet with students and mentor them. We always talk about mentorship, but it's not possible if you're doing one class at Queens College and have to jump on a train or 3 trains to get to Brooklyn College, where you have your other subsistence job. Mm. And these are people with PhDs. We're not talking about having people who don't have sufficient credentials. So that's a big issue. The state and the city should provide more support for those institutions.
The maintenance of effort battle was partially tied to that, right?
The maintenance of effort is ensuring that we don't ask students to pay more while the city or the state drain, particularly the state, drain money out the back door. Yeah. We've passed it twice in both houses, either unanimously or near unanimous votes, and the governor's vetoed it twice. It's now in front of him again, and we passed it in both houses at the end of session. And so I firmly believe that the governor, who has demonstrated some commitment to ensuring greater access, we want that greater access, but we want to ensure quality, and you cannot do that on the cheap.
Yeah. The DREAM Act has been another issue out there, financial aid for children of undocumented families. Any sense of progress on that issue?
You know, it's really sad that Texas and other similar states have the DREAM Act in place, and in New York State, a beacon of progressive ideals, we cannot provide, and people who your viewers might not know, the DREAM Act simply says if you're undocumented, and you've been a graduate of a city or state high school, you can have the same access to scholarships and state support like tuition assistance that everybody else has. Some of these youngsters are the valedictorian in their school, and the students next to them have access to these scholarships. They do not. That's wrong. We have invested in them. By law, where we have to educate them through high school. We should not be losing our investment and potential of those young people.
Yeah. Another important gateway, particularly related to the issue of cost, has been our community colleges.
Yes.
Are we doing enough for them? Are they? What's your view as how they fit in the mix?
Community colleges are funded differently. They are allegedly, one-third.
Never quite comes to that, but yeah.
One-third tuition,
Yeah.
one-third local
Local,
sponsor, which
yeah.
is either a county or the city of New York,
Right.
and one-third by the state. The state, that would be 33%, where barely passing 25%. So the burden
And that's
is
gone on for a while. I remember
a long time.
when I was on the higher ed committee, that was an issue that kept coming up.
And counties are struggling,
Yeah.
so they don't want to, have to pony up. So it's our community colleges are among the most expensive, and yet it is the gateway. 50% of students start their college experience in community college.
It's up to 50%.
Yes.
Wow, wow.
And it's growing. They've seen some diminution of enrollment, partly because people can't afford. The number one reason why people drop out of college isn't the rigor of college, it's financial.
Yeah, well, we need you to keep fighting for those college students, for the access and keeping the quality. We're out of time. We're going to have you come back again.
I would love that.
And I just appreciate the fact that you keep fighting the good fight on all these important issues. You have as much energy and enthusiasm as the first day I met you, and that's an inspiration for me. Thank you, Deborah Glick.
Thank you so much.
For your service and everything that you do. And we'll take a short break. We're going to continue talking about some additional issues with my next guest. Thanks for watching Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. We will be right back. Welcome back to Represent NYC. I'm New York State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli. Senator Brian Cavanaugh has a long record as a progressive advocate for reform. After a decade in the state assembly, he won election to the state senate last year. Senator Kavanaugh, thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be here.
We had the chance to get to know each other when you were in the assembly, and you made the leap over to the Senate. I remember when I first joined the legislature back in the late 80s, the assembly was viewed as the House with a little bit of confusion, and the Senate was staid and predictable, and you managed to join the Senate at a time where it's anything but.
Yeah, I like to think I didn't spur the chaos over there, but yes.
But I know that a lot of press reports about frustration over what wasn't done because of dysfunction. I hate to use that word, but sometimes you have to, with the process in the state Senate. Share with us your view, having gone through the Senate session. What's wrong with that process? What didn't get done? What priorities are you going to continue to fight for?
Yeah, so we had some successes this year, but I think at the very end of the session, it just sort of petered out. And the Republicans who control the Senate at this point were unwilling to move on a variety of really basic priorities.
Were they unwilling, or they just couldn't do it because they didn't have the votes?
Well, I think, look, if you have 32 of the 63 votes and you're unwilling to work with the other party, then you may not have the votes unless you have a unanimity. But there are many things that a broad range of Democrats and perhaps many Republicans would have supported, but they stuck together and declined to bring a lot of things to the floor for a vote. So we had a very big push, something I've worked on for a long time, and I know you have, on election reform, early voting and allowing people to get absentee ballots without some elaborate excuse, modernizing our registration system. All of these are things that disenfranchise people. Fixing those things are broadly popular in all parts of the state, and yet Republicans declined, in spite of great pressure from Democrats, to even bring those things to the floor.
And you've had a leadership role on those issues because you're the ranking Democrat on the Elections Committee.
Right, and I think that over the course of many years, the Assembly has increasingly embraced those things. So in the last couple of years, the Assembly has now passed a very broad package that really would bring our state's election laws from, I think it's fair to say we're in the lower tier of states in terms of enfranchising voters. The package that they've been passing would bring it into the top tier, and those are some bills I worked on as an Assembly member. Was hoping this year we might be able to get some progress in the Senate, but really we were shut out.
Yeah. I know there's so many issues that you focus on, both locally and that of statewide significance. You've been a particular champion on the issue of gun violence, and we, headlines every day. I mean, it's just incredible what we're going through in this country. And you head the legislators' caucus, if that's the right phrase for it, that focuses on the gun violence issue. Just give us an update on your legislative work there and what else you think we need to be doing.
Yeah, so I'll be heading off in about a month to a national conference of American state legislators for gun violence prevention, which is an organization I founded and chair that represents legislators from every state in the country. And I think that in spite of a lot of these very horrific incidents, the story at the state level around the country is pretty good. We're making a lot of progress. And even in New York, we passed a bill this year that will now prohibit people who've been convicted of a violent misdemeanor in a domestic violence context from accessing guns. But the big priority this year was something called extreme risk protection orders. It's a bill that would permit family members or law enforcement or district attorneys to go to a court, present evidence somebody's likely to harm themselves or others, and temporarily suspend that person's access to guns. There's all kinds of due process associated with that, and that's something that now, state after state is moving. But again, notwithstanding all members of the Democratic Conference, plus a number of Republicans who voted in favor of that in committee, the Republicans declined to bring it to the floor. And we have 900 gun deaths a year in New York. That's lower than many other states, but it's still far too many. Yeah. And that is something that would immediately begin to address that.
Yeah, well, I thank you for your leadership nationally on that issue. It's very important. You have gone from representing an assembly district in Manhattan to now having a Senate district. I think it's pretty much 50-50, isn't it? Manhattan
it's
and
more
Brooklyn?
Manhattan than Brooklyn,
but
it's a significant chunk of Brooklyn.
But that's very diverse neighborhoods and communities. I'm sure that's a challenge. I know one of the issues that we hear about throughout the city, throughout the boroughs, is the issue of NYCHA and New York City Housing Authority and what's been happening there. You've been very outspoken on behalf of the needs of the tenants. Give us an update on your perspective as to where we're at with dealing with that.
Yeah, so I've represented many public housing residents for a long time in the Assembly. I represent even more now as a senator. And, it's a very tough situation. On the one hand, we've had some obvious management challenges, and I think the fact that there's now a federal monitor and some new leadership at Housing Authority may be an opportunity to start fresh. I don't think that the problems of the last couple of years come primarily from the mistakes of a particular chair. I think Shola Olate, the former chair, obviously made some mistakes, but also did a lot of good things to try to reshape the way things are managed. The big question there has been funding for a long time. The federal government started disinvesting a very long time ago. The city and the state both pulled what had been routine capital funding and expense subsidies out many years ago. We've been fighting for a long time for more state money. This year we got $250 million in capital. That is the largest single-year allocation, basically in many, many years in the state. I think it's about half what we should be doing, but it is some modest good news for people who are suffering in some very bad conditions in public housing across the city.
That was part of the state budget process, as I recall. So we'll follow up from our office to see how that money is spent down the road.
We'd like your help in making sure it gets spent quickly and properly.
Yeah. Another big local issue is transportation. A lot of talk about the MTA and the subways and the buses. But I know for your district, the L train is a particular issue. Give us an update on your view on how the MTA is handling that.
The L train is expected to shut down the tunnel under the East River, and all of the Manhattan stops are expected to shut down next April. That is to do necessary repairs resulting from the flooding that happened after the Sandy storm. And I think the MTA, to its credit, and the City Department of Transportation as well, got started early in reaching out to communities. We are lurching toward a plan that I think will allow the city to make the best of it. There are additional ferries. Yesterday we announced a very substantial expansion of bike share, of City Bike. But the bulk of the displaced passengers will be on other train lines with added service, and a very substantial new set of dedicated bus lanes and new shuttle routes across the Williamsburg Bridge. One thing we need very much from the state on that is those lanes are intended. The lanes on the Williamsburg Bridge are intended to be HOV 3, 3-person occupancy of vehicles and buses. This MTA needs state authorization to enforce those lanes for the HOV. That's a bill that my colleague Joe Lenthal in Brooklyn passed in the Assembly, and right to the end we were getting some assurances from my Republican colleagues that they would authorize that. I think it got hung up in a debate over school speed cameras, which is another thing that the Republicans have now allowed to lapse. Those cameras will be turned off in a few weeks. So that's an issue we're going to continue to fight on. We do need state authorization for that, and it'd be better if we don't wait until a few months before the shutdown, which will be the beginning of the next session. Just more generally, the MTA is in crisis. It's really the lifeblood of the city, and yet we've, again, seriously underinvested in it for a very long time. They've also had some management challenges and some questions about the cost of certain projects, but without adequate funding, that system is going to continue to be very disruptive of people's lives. People need it to get to work and to school and to all the other places that make New York worth living in, and it's in desperate shape. So we really, one of the things my colleagues and I have been calling for is a real fully funded capital plan.
Yeah. Big issue. We only have about a minute and a half left, but I know in terms of quality of life, you're big on pools and access for our young people to have good recreation opportunities. Governor's Island, that's one of the areas you'd like to see something?
I think I will say a shout out to my predecessor, Daniel Squadron, who was the champion of a certain pool in Brooklyn Bridge Park. Right. But I seem to have inherited that mantle, and so we recently announced with Brooklyn Bridge Park and a lot of other folks a permanent site for a we've had what's called a pop-up pool in Brooklyn Bridge Park, which has served people well. That site is ending, and we've now announced a fully Parks Department pool. It's contiguous with the park. We're still working on funding that. And in addition, one of the first things I did when I got in office is visit the Harbor School, which is a terrific school of maritime skills. And yet, notwithstanding the centrality of swimming and diving that program, they have no pool. Mm-hmm. So the thought is to fund a pool for the school that would also be usable for the nearly 1 million visitors to Governor's Island every summer.
Great. You have a lot going on locally and statewide and even nationally. We wish you well with that issue of the gun violence, and thanks for your leadership, Brian. You've obviously made the transition from Assembly to the Senate very well, and with your continued leadership, let's hope the Senate gets back on track to do the right thing for the people of New York City and New York State.
And thank you for all that you're doing for our state.
Well, it's a great partnership. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Well, we've run out of time. Senator Kavanaugh, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you. I also want to thank Assemblymember Deborah Glick for sharing her thoughts with me today as well. I hope our conversations have provided some helpful insight and perspective into some of the issues that are shaping New York City. I'm New York State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli. Thank you for watching Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network.